Welcome or welcome back, literarians, to the Literary Lore YouTube channel. I'm Literary Lori, aka Lori L. Tharps. And if you love reading books or writing books that center the lives of Black people and other people of color globally, then you are in the right place, because I totally love these things too. And I created this YouTube channel to share my love of all things Black people, bookish, and other people of color. However, this video is not about my love of books so much as it is about my love of Black authors. Yes, this is part of my ongoing series for Black Literary History Month. Every single day in February, I am sharing the story of an incredible Black author born in February, because I think everybody should be celebrating Black Literary History Month in February instead of just Black History Month, because of the freakishly large amount of incredible Black authors from all over the world who were born in February. So every single day in February, I am sharing the story of one of these amazing authors, and today is no different. So let's get to it. Today, we are talking about the Claude Manchild in the Promised Land Brown. Yes, Claude Brown was actually born on February 23rd, which, if you're watching in real time, was yesterday. But W.E.B. Du Bois was born on February 23rd as well, and we had to give him a whole video. So not to shortchange either W.B. Du Bois or Claude, we are talking about Claude today on February 24th, even though he was born on the 23rd. So keep up. I hope that's okay with everybody. All right. So it is day 24 of the series. And today we are speaking about, again, Claude Brown. Now, this is I'm not saying it's a special episode, but unlike a lot of the other people we have spoken about in this series, Claude Brown is known for one particular book that really made him famous. He did not only write one book, but he is so well known for his book, Manchild in the Promised Land. I want to kind of tell you guys the story of that book, because it is the story of Claude Brown, and it is the story of how he became a writer. And it is an inspirational and amazing story that if you didn't know the backstory for, you're going to be surprised. And I always try to surprise you guys. I'm always trying to give you information you don't know about famous authors that maybe you think you know all about them. So today we're going to hear about kind of how that book, Manchild in the Promised Land, came to be and how it changed Claude Brown's life. Okay, so let us begin at the beginning. And that is actually before Claude Brown is even born. So Claude Brown's parents had been sharecroppers in South Carolina. And like many other people who decided to move north during the Great Migration, looking for a better life, his parents were part of that era, and they moved 2 years before Claude's birth. So they moved from South Carolina to Harlem, looking for this quote unquote promised land for Black people. Now, unfortunately, and what was the story for many Black people coming from the South, they did not find a promised land. They found a difficult situation, hard to find work, difficult living conditions, hostile environments to raise children. So it was far from a promised land. Claude's father, his father found work as a railroad worker. His father's name was Henry Lee, and his mother, Ossie, found work as a domestic, cleaning houses for wealthier people. Claude had two older sisters. I'm not sure if they were both older, but he had two sisters and a younger brother. So Claude's parents are, working hard, trying to make this better life, but finding things very difficult. Both parents struggled in their own ways. And young Claude is born into this environment in 1937. Okay. So Claude, I'm extrapolating here, okay? I'm trying to tell you a good story. But essentially, imagine young Claude, he's born already, like he's obviously he has a quick mind, he's smart, but he's frustrated by the life that he is born into. He is literally a troublemaker from day one. His mother, like, he said something like his mother's like favorite line to him would be like, "What kind of trouble did you get into today?" That was her understanding of who her child was. And sure enough, the child little Claude was already like getting into real trouble by the time he was 6 years old. He had been expelled from elementary school by the time he was 8 and was actively involved in gang activities starting at age 9. So you can imagine that Claude's young life was, again, it was full of trouble. And his parents, he was sent to reform schools, juvenile detention centers. At one point, his parents are like, "We got to do something." They sent him down south, back to South Carolina for a year, hoping that would, just get him away from the streets. But nothing worked. At some point, he was sent to a very well-known juvenile detention center for boys. And Claude said that it was there that he learned even more ways to be a criminal, because there were other other boys who were there who had also been sent there because they were leading criminal lives. So it had the actual opposite effect on him being sent to these centers. So he's just in and out of juvenile detention centers, reform schools, in and out of conflicts with the law, and getting into drug sales, gang activity, theft, robberies. The only thing that happened in all of this time, and again, if he starts at age 9, we're not talking like in his 20s. He's still a kid, but he's doing some really, bad stuff, real criminal activity where he's, constantly in and out of reform or penal situations. And again, all he said is that being locked up gave him more access to more criminals, to get more ideas to be even a worse criminal. But there was one situation in one reform school where there was a psychologist on staff who recognized that Claude was a smart kid, and he suggested that he, read biographies of prominent African American people. So he did do that. Make a note of that, okay? Make a note, remember that, put a pin in that bit of the story. So again, he goes in and out, in and out, in and out. At one point, he gets shot in the stomach, he gets shot in the leg, he almost dies. Nothing is stopping him. Finally, around age 17, Claude gets a wake-up call. And the wake-up call is simply that so many of his friends at this point were strung out on heroin, okay? And worst of all, his little brother was strung out on heroin. And he just feels hopeless. He feels like with everybody in jail or strung out on drugs, it's like he just gets to a point where he's like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Mind you, he's 17. But he realizes on his own that he's got to get out of Harlem, that's the problem. And so he decides to leave Harlem. Now, when I hear leave Harlem, I'm like, okay, he's going to go to another city, another state. No, he just goes down to the Greenwich Village. Those of you who know New York City, that's a subway right away. But it was enough of a distance, like both mentally and physically, that Claude found being in the village down in lower-ish, not even totally lower Manhattan, but lower-ish Manhattan, that he could start over. He could reinvent himself, if you will. So he leaves Harlem, again, just completely dismayed, really broken that so many of his friends had succumbed to drug addiction. Again, also his little brother. And he goes down there to the village. He gets a bunch of part-time jobs, and he starts going to night school. He goes and gets the equivalent of a high school diploma via night school. He supports himself with all kinds of odd jobs, including a busboy. He was even selling cosmetics. And what I thought was fascinating is that in addition to all of this, reinvention, he starts studying piano. Yeah, he starts taking piano lessons, and he starts learning French, which probably is part of his high school curriculum. But again, understand, a mind that was deep into the criminal world, he turned all of that attention onto his own education. When he graduates from high school, he's in his early 20s and makes the decision to continue his education, and he ends up getting a scholarship, and he goes and he's accepted to Howard University. So now he's full-on scholar. He's excited about education. He goes to Howard, decides to double major in government and business, which makes sense, right? And he starts taking writing classes too with a professor by the name of Toni Morrison. Yeah, that Toni Morrison. Don't you love the way these things dovetail, these stories dovetail? So yes, Claude Brown is at Howard, and he's under the tutelage of none other than Toni Morrison. And it's not like she specially tutored him, but he was taking her classes and was highly inspired by her. So while he's there, while he's at Howard, he gets a call from that psychologist. Remember, I told you to put a pin in that? The psychologist who had always noted that Claude had that intelligence and had told him to read the biographies of famous African Americans. He knew Claude was at Howard, and he said, "Hey, Claude, why don't you write about your experiences for this magazine called Descent? I think they would love to get an article from you talking about your life and, where you are now." So Claude's like, "Okay, cool. I'm working with Toni Morrison. I can pull out an essay." So he writes that essay, okay? And from that essay in that magazine, an editor from Macmillan Publishers reaches out to Claude and says, "Yo, you should turn this into a book." Gives him $2,000 for an advance and says, "You got to turn this into a book." Now, mind you, Claude's a freshman in college. Sure, he's 21, but still, he's a freshman in college. But he's like, "Dude, I'm on it." And then it takes him 2 years. Sorry, allergies. Takes him 2 years, and he writes a 1,537 page manuscript. And apparently he delivers it in a box, okay? A 1,500 page, not word, page manuscript. And the editor's like, "Yo, I don't even know what to do with that. That is so long." And the box of the manuscript just sits at Macmillan in a back room somewhere, and that original editor disappears. Claude goes on with his life at school, but a year later, another editor from Macmillan stumbles upon this gigantic box of a manuscript, starts going through it, is like, "Wow, this is incredible." He reaches back out to Claude and is like, "Yo, I think you really got something here. Let's work on it. Let's edit it together." That person, that editor's name was Alan Risler. So Alan's like, "Claude, come on, let's do it." Claude's like, "Cool, let's do it." The two of them work together, and they get the book ready for publication. They obviously edit it down from 1,500 pages, and the book comes out. Wait. This part, I'm not exactly sure the timing, but Alan gets Claude a $100,000 advance, even though he'd been given an advance. I guess that first $2,000 must have been more like here, you can do it. But the $100,000, because it was a pre-publication advance for the paperback, for the book, essentially. So I'm assuming that was a new advance that they gave him, because that's a huge amount of money, but they obviously believed in the book. Even so, they didn't do a huge publicity campaign for it. Nonetheless, the book was released in 1965, which is the same year that Claude graduated from Howard. And then guess what happened? The book was a huge success upon publication. It hit the New York Times bestseller list at number 5, and people say that it did so well. I mean, it sold millions of copies, and people say that it's because of the timing, that it was right in the middle of the civil rights movement. White people wanted to know what it was like to be Black. They wanted to know about Black America, and Black Americans were like, "We want to see our stories. We want to see our reality reflected." So that book it just exploded, beyond literary circles. Everybody was talking about the book and people were buying it. This is just a quote from Amiri Baraka. Yes, the Amiri Baraka. He had said this in the LA Times, and I'm pretty sure this came from his obit, but still, this is why Amiri Baraka said the book did so well. He said, quote, "It was in the tradition of classic narratives like those of Frederick Douglass and Malcolm X. In fact, Manchild arrived at the same time as Malcolm X's autobiography, and I think they were both testaments of the kind of rage we were seeing in Watts, Detroit, and Newark. The rage of the working class and poor Black people. It was illumination for those who didn't know it and confirmation for those who needed it. It was as if the fire could talk, this is what he would say," unquote. So you see again that this is what people needed to understand. Why was there so much rage? What was happening in the Black community? And Manchild in the Promised Land, it's called a novel, but an autobiographical novel. It's pretty much Claude Brown's story, but he called it a novel. I don't know what was fictionalized in it, but the point was it was very raw, it was very gritty, but it also had hope because you know he's writing it from the perspective of, you know, this is where I am now, and there's possibility for change, right? So it was one of those books where you could really, you know, immerse yourself in the streets, so to speak, but also understand that there was a possibility for hope. And in fact, that's what happened. Like a lot of people, again, it wasn't just literary critics or people who, you know, quote unquote, like to read that loved this book. There was a riot at the Sing Sing prison because the prisoners staged a protest. I shouldn't say a riot. They staged a protest because they all wanted copies of the book. Claude Brown said at that point when the book came out that he was overwhelmed with his sudden celebrity. He said he was, quote, getting more mail than the president. People were telling him that Manchild and the Promised Land changed their lives. So again, this was like a phenomenon, okay? And the overwhelm for Claude was a bit much, he said at the time, but he went on with his life. He entered Stanford University Law School. He transferred and ended up finishing his law degree at Rutgers, but he was going to just kind of quietly go off and do his thing, but the popularity for Manchild and the Promised Land really opened up a new world for him, and he ended up, rather than practicing law, he pretty much ended up being a public speaker, a writer, a journalist, like a freelance journalist, and a motivational speaker, always continuing to work with at-risk youth, kids on the street, because he continued to see, you know, the need for that. He did write a follow-up book called The Children of Ham. That was almost 10 years later in 1976. And that book explored the lives of teenagers, Black teenagers in Harlem who do escape the clutches of heroin. Unfortunately, when you have a book as popular as Manchild in the Promised Land, unfortunately, this second book, people compared it to that and were like, oh, it was terrible. It wasn't as good. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it's almost impossible to write that second book that's going to eclipse something that was as significant of a bestseller, as Manchild in the Promised Land, which ended up selling something over 4 million copies. So, but that didn't stop, again, it didn't stop Claude Brown from delivering his message, whether that was through lectures and articles. His writing was published after Manchild came out in Esquire, the Saturday Evening Post, Life, Look magazine, the New York Times magazine. And I found also that he had several residencies at the MacDowell Colony, which is for, very, very experienced and prolific writers. And he was at MacDowell in 1977, 1983, 1986, 1989. So despite the fact that his second book wasn't the big splash that the first one was, he was still recognized as a compelling and important and impactful writer. And he used, journalism to continue writing articles. In fact, in the 80s, he was writing about the crack epidemic and often comparing it to the heroin epidemic of his youth, okay? And apparently he was even working on a third book comparing the crack epidemic of the 80s to the heroin epidemic of the 40s and 50s. So sadly, that third book never was finished because Claude Brown died when he was only 64 years old. He died of respiratory failure on February 6, 2002. That obviously makes me so sad because, again, when you have somebody who was still working so hard to spread the message of the ravages of racism, drug addiction, the things that Black people have to contend with because of how they are forced to live, the sense of hopelessness, etc. He was consistently working on those themes, as you can see, even by the last book he was working on. So it does make one, really always wonder if his life hadn't been cut short, what he would be doing at this time with his words and his work. So I want to leave you with just kind of an epilogue to Manchild in the Promised Land. If you haven't read it, you might want to. That book continues to sell approximately 30,000 copies a year. It is required reading in many high schools and colleges even to this day. I saw one statistic that said at one point Manchild in the Promised Land was Macmillan Publishers' #2 best-selling title after only Gone with the Wind. I don't know if that's still true, but it's at one point it was. And so despite Claude Brown, not getting another bestseller, remember, Claude Brown wasn't attempting to be an author. That was never his goal. He wrote a book because somebody asked him to. He told his story because he realized that his story was worth telling. And I hope that's inspiring to some of you who know that you have a story worth telling and recognizing one book sometimes is all it takes to open up possibilities in all different areas of your life. That one book opened up an opportunity for Claude Brown to speak all over the world. And yes, that book, Manchild in the Promised Land, was translated into 14 different languages. It gave him the opportunity to continue to talk to young people, to inspire people, whether it was prisoners, kids on the street, or housewives in Iowa. The idea of transformation is possible. And it doesn't matter if you were, in reform school in Harlem. It doesn't matter. It's this very idea of what's possible, that how we can change our own lives despite the circumstances we're born into. So again, if you have a story that you want to tell about your own life, that you transformed your life in some way, or that you think that your life could support or help somebody else who goes through similar circumstances, write it down and share your story. It just takes one book, and you never know how that could change your life and change someone else's life. So thank you to Claude Brown for being brave enough to share your truth. And again, I hope his story will inspire some of you to tell your stories. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will be here tomorrow with another amazing story about another amazing Black writer born in February. Bye.